Hi again, this is Witchhassle. Let's get to work. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Witchhassle, a show talking to practitioners and scholars about the work of witchcraft and finding answers to listener questions about all things magic, occult, witchy, and wild-eyed. I'm your host, Cooper Wilhelm, and for our first episode, I am very pleased to bring you my interview with Sarah Lyons. Sarah is an activist and witch whose new book, Revolutionary Witchcraft, is available from Running Press. In it, she talks about what activists can learn from magic and the place witches have in saving the world from the forces of fascism and cruelty. We met at her apartment in Queens and had a lovely conversation about magic, politics, and a number of other things, and about 20 minutes into the recording, we had a brief technical glitch that I can attribute to Mercury in retrograde because I am a witch, but all in all, the conversation proved deeply exciting and wonderfully thoughtful. I'll see you on the other side of the interview. Here's my talk with Sarah. So, it's a hard question where to begin with this book, besides saying congratulations, and I loved it, and it was great.
Thank you.
And hooray you. I guess which came first? The witchcraft or the activist leftism politics?
In my own life, definitely the witchcraft, I'd say. Well, I guess it's actually harder to piece out than that because on the one hand, in my own personal life and stuff that I became interested in and discovered on my own, I think witchcraft because I can't really recall a time when I wasn't interested in the occult or magic or when you're as a kid, mythology and folk tales and that kind of stuff. And when I was really young, 14 years old, that's when I kind of decided to dedicate myself to magic and witchcraft, which at the time was giving myself a baby, Wiccan self-initiation, but it still counts, So, cause that was the only game in town, of course, when
right.
I was young was Silver Raven Wolf and Wicca stuff. So I've always been interested, and it's been a lifelong passion and pursuit of mine. But I also grew up in a very political family. My mom was a politician for most of my young life, for about 8 years. And when I was a kid, she was just very... My dad is very, politically informed, that kind of stuff, but my mom was very active in it. So, when I was a kid, I remember being brought to, the Democratic Convention and, all this kind of, I remember...
The Massachusetts one or, the big one?
I was at the Massachusetts one when John Kerry was running in 2004, but I was in the 90s, I would have been in whatever one was happening in, I think, Annapolis or Baltimore.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But I remember seeing, Hillary Clinton speaking when I was, maybe 5 years old, really, really young, wow. and which is, here's a funny joke. All right, the first time I ever see her, I don't know who the fuck this woman is, and my mom leans down and says, that's going to be the first female president. And we laugh, and we laugh, and we laugh some more, and we keep laughing. So, there's, that's a weird memory of mine. But yes, I remember just always kind of having this, not I couldn't escape politics as a young kid, so I think it's probably inevitable that this book happened.
Yeah. And I don't know, it makes perfect sense to me that witchcraft and active politics and so on would go hand in hand so well, just because, I think, it kind of falls in that idea that Marx said that philosophy has heretofore explained the world, but the point is to change it, which is very much, witchcraft is applied philosophy. But there seems to be a big disconnect between those two camps, the witches and the leftists. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think on the left, it's been... I think spirituality in general has been cut out of parts of the left because I think for so many people, religion caused so much pain and was tied up in, the capitalist ruling class and was tied up in the state, and especially in parts of Europe, the the church, the state, and capital were all one big entity together. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, rightfully so, attacked religion in the way that they saw it manifested in their lives because, that was part of the thing they were fighting against. And, I see that, and I think it makes, sense from that kind of perspective. And yet, this doesn't go away. Like, we're not gonna stop having spiritual experiences. We're not gonna stop interacting with things in this way. And I think I really think the big break in the last couple years, just watching politics and religion, was really the new atheist movement. I think that changed a lot, and in a way that we've kind of forgotten that it happened.
Yeah.
But I think it really was a sea change, because it was, to me, and where I'm sitting right now, I think it was maybe the last gasp of that kind of really aggressive, we need to end religion in order to end all the world's problems. And it was the big culmination of that. And, so quickly a lot of the figures in that, turned to the right, because I think that reveals a lot, right? I think it reveals that okay, not only is this not going to solve the problem of capitalism, not only is this going to not solve the problem of oppression, but actually this can be used as a weapon just as anything else. It can be tied up with racism and colonialism just like any other Western philosophy, right? Or any other thing. So I think that watching that happen, and people watching oh wait, atheism didn't bring this leftist paradise that we thought it was going to, or it didn't, divorcing religion from the project, whatever that is not actually going to solve problems like we thought it was going to, and it's actually going to create quite a few. And so I think that on the one hand, I think people watching that happen has had a positive effect on the left and its approach to religion. It's at least talking about America in this moment right now. We can go on about liberation theology in South America and all those other things, right? But I really think also that and I talk about this in the book, but I think the election of Donald Trump really was a lot of people's first real encounter with the power of magic in a big public way, because I think that Trump just honestly used chaos magic to get elected.
That is so. I've heard people bring this possibility up before in a sort of general kind of way, but for folks who aren't familiar with chaos magic, and tease that out maybe. So how would Trump's ascent sort of indicate a kind of chaos magic or embody a kind of chaos magic?
Sure. So there's this show. Oh my god, I'm gonna forget the name of it, but there's a show on Netflix, Dirty Money, and in the last episode of it, they kind of go through Trump's life, right? They just kind of go through how he built his empire, basically. And one of the things that they talk about very early on is that whenever he would go to these high society events in New York, or one of big parties, that kind of stuff, he would always call up or be called up by one of the tabloids at the time, or the New York Post or things like that, and he would say, okay, I'll tell you who was there. I'll tell you who was hitting on who. I'll say what trashy dress Anna Wintour was wearing, blah, blah, blah. But you have to put the word billionaire in front of my name. And they were like, okay, well, we want your stories. You're the only one willing to talk to us who was at that event. So, we'll do that. And so he wasn't a billionaire.
Yeah.
Most likely he wasn't. He most likely is not now. But he may not even be a millionaire now. Who knows? But by saying billionaire Donald Trump, by saying that, I am this wealthy person, he created that reality.
Yeah.
Chaos magic is this idea that reality is a malleable thing, and that we are able to have a direct effect on not just our reality, but the reality around, not just our personal reality, but actual reality, because through our beliefs, because reality is in large part a function of belief. And that belief is a tool that we can use to fuck with that, basically.
Right. And you say a lot of interesting stuff about consensus reality in this book, which is really lovely. And the idea that protest and the way that we talk about politics is a way of shifting that. So what are some ways do you think that the average person who does not have access to tabloids and things like that can do things in a politically minded way to shift our consensus reality towards... I mean, what is the idea that we pretend we live in the world we want until it becomes reality? Or, like, how would you apply this to, like, politics in general?
Well, I think it's a tricky thing, right? Because, and I think I say this also in the book, and I want to be very clear that, like, I'm not advocating that people just pretend that global warming isn't real, right? Like, I'm not saying, like, oh, just, like, keep acting like everything's fine and someday everything will be fine. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Like, I think we have to be very real about the problems that we are facing and, like, the actual material issues that are happening in our world, and acknowledge that first if we're going to change it. So, like, being honest about the, you know, whatever it is that you are passionate about fighting, like, actually looking at that, actually, like, seeing the ways that that is being manifested in our world is, I think, the first step and very important, because you don't want to get, like, delusional and just check out, right?
Yeah.
But I think the key, like, where changing consensus reality comes in is knowing that the way that things are right now, like, is not how they've always been, and actually can be changed. Like, right now in New York, we're seeing a lot of the issue du jour, and the thing that people are really upset about right now is the recent subway fare hikes and more police presence being added to the subways. And it's been horrible. Yeah.
There were 8 cops on my subway platform this morning.
No fucking way. It's Jesus. Yeah, so it's just it's literal overkill. It's awful, and a lot of people are mad about it. And I think one of the tactics that's being used by activists right now is mass fare evasion, that, you know, getting a bunch of people together to just, like, not pay the fare and just hop the turnstile. And I think that is actually a really good example of changing consensus reality, right? Because it's like, well, why do we have to pay to get on the subway? Like, we could just get on the subway. And it's kind of showing, like, look, here we are just getting on the subway and not paying the fare. And that is a very, like, they're not sitting around saying, like, oh, this fare hike isn't happening, or, like, oh, there's not cops on the subway. It's saying, no, like, that's real, but it literally does not have to be that way. And we can enact together in a ritualistic way what a world would look like if that wasn't the case. And the more that we do that, the greater the chances that that world is actually going to become a reality. And I think that it's just, I love those protests, because I think that it's a really great example of, like, public ritual magic as, like, a political as a political act.
Yeah, that's really, so that's a distinction that I think is really useful, that we might have to talk about for a second. Just like, when we talk about, like, a public ritual that is done for a political purpose, you are not necessarily talking about, like, 5 people, like 200 people in a room, candles are lit, they are invoking Baphomet to kill Lindsey Graham or something like that.
Gentlemen, to evil.
Yeah, exactly. We're not doing that. We're doing something else. Like, you something that is, I think, amazing in this book is the way that you actually give little edible snippets of, you know, the history of, say, ACT UP, or the battle in Seattle or something like that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, like, when you are conceiving of a political ritual, you're conceiving of something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that was something I really wanted to do differently with this book, because there's a lot of books, I think, being written right now or already written on political magic, or magic as a political tool. And, you know, I think there's a lot of, like, great stuff in those books, and there's, you know, smart things that people can tease out of them. But I didn't want to write about, like, literal, like, people in robes chanting and lighting candles, like you say, right? Like, I wanted to talk about, like, okay, if everything around us is magic, like, if everything around us is a function of magic and a function of belief and a function of power and these things interplaying together, okay, then everything is magic. I don't have to find, you know, I don't have to go and find that specific ritual where people were literally saying, like, we are actually doing magic right now. I can find instances where people maybe didn't know that they were doing magic, but you look at it and you're like, that is magic. That is political magic happening there.
What's a good example of that? Like, you can, like, just from history, or from, like, something to say from the book. Or... Sure.
So, well, you brought up, I try to bring up examples that people might not have heard of before, because I think that when I wrote this book, I was kind of anticipating this being a kind of 101 book for a lot of people. That this was maybe going to be a lot of people's first book on either witchcraft or activism or both. So I wanted to give people examples that they probably hadn't encountered before and might not encounter too much in the future. So I wanted to talk about like the Zapatistas in Mexico and like you said, the battle in Seattle, which is like, I'm so obsessed. This is what a fucking nerd I am. I'm really obsessed with like 90s activism because it's a very weird time in the history of like the left in the United States. And so I'm like, that's probably the weirdest example I use because everyone's like, what the fuck is that? But I'm like, I'm so interested in like the type of activism that was going on in the 90s because it's just so weird to me and fascinating. So the battle in Seattle I think is I use it as sort of an anti-example because basically the World Trade Organization was set to have its final meeting of the millennium in Seattle in the very end of 1999 and like the end of November, beginning of December. And people were understandably kind of mad about that for a lot of reasons. The WTO is this like global organization whose job is to manage trade, and it was kind of it was one of the big Clintonian like neoliberal. It's a symbol of that kind of politics, right? A very big global end of history neoliberalism, right? So people are mad about it for a lot of different reasons and come together like. There's environmentalists, there's labor, there's, gender equality, there's all this stuff happening. And people actually shut down the whole city and like got the meeting canceled. And that's incredible. And it was like the news all over the world. Like people, it finally got people talking about, the WTO and world trade and like all this stuff in a way that people weren't talking about before. And that's all excellent. But in the long term, they didn't succeed. Like WTO is still around. Global trade has only grown. Inequality has only worsened. Yeah. So like, how are you able to pull off such a momentary win and like literally shut an American city down, yet still lose in the long term, right? And I wanted to frame it in a magical sense because I think that like going back to consensus reality, it maybe was a time when like they didn't do enough to shift that. Like the consensus reality wasn't quite shifted enough. There wasn't enough of a global movement or like what was the reality that they were even trying to shift? At the end of it, everyone goes back to their separate camps instead of staying together in this multi-faceted movement, right? And that's, I think, why 90s activism is so fascinating to me. I know I'm going on a tangent, but like, because it's lacking that like left politics and that like anti-capitalist critique where it's like, oh man, if you had only had a bit more of the language, like if you had only had a bit more of like the right words, if you had only like come together a little bit more, maybe like we wouldn't be living in hell world right now. Yeah. And it's easy to look back and say that, but I think it's just such an interesting and crucial time. But yeah, so I wanted, when I was using examples in the book, I really wanted to use stuff that was like, a lot of people talk about, when they talk about political magic, they'll talk about something like Operation Sea Lion, like the famous, like when Hitler tried to invade Britain, famously a bunch of witches got together and like assembled a coven to try to stop that from happening. And all of a sudden this huge storm kicks up and the Nazis are not able to invade Britain. And it's probably the reason that Hitler was never able to gain a foothold in Britain. A lot of people use examples like that where it's like, okay, here's people literally doing magic against like a political figure. And I think it's a good example. I think it's interesting, but I wanted to expand people's idea of what magic and what politics are through the examples that I'm using.
And I think the book does a really immense job of that. So well done.
Thank you.
But at the same time, you mentioned this is a 101 for both activism and magic. And there's some really lovely little bits in here about, your first magical initiation, how to do ancestor work, how to do talking to land spirits and things like that. And I'm curious because I feel like a lot of people, they approach magic and they really want a strong sense of, give me the recipe for the thing, tell me the steps I need to take, who do I need to pay money to do this. And yours is much more open-ended.
Thank you.
It's much more malleable and adaptable. So I'm curious, like if someone, say, wanted to get involved in having a connection with land spirits, the spirits of the land, do they need to go into the woods? Do they need to take a 6-hour bus trip to the Forest Primeval in Hackensack, New Jersey? I actually don't know how urban Hackensack is. It's just the first place in New Jersey that came to mind.
Well, I think it depends. I think, first of all, no. I want to back up a little bit and touch on something you said, because I'm really happy that you noticed the way that I put the examples together when and exercises together. When I was writing the book, I was trying to think back to like when I was a kid reading, books on magic for the first time. And when I was young, I always thought that like what I wanted was like the Key of Solomon. And I always thought I wanted like some big complicated book that was going to like give me all of these recipes and spells for like summoning demons. And like I thought that was what I thought I wanted, right? Yeah. And looking back, what I actually needed was a compass. And what I needed was like a way to navigate all of the books that I was reading and like how to put them together and
technical mishap. Starting again in 3, 2.
Okay, so let's see how well. If you said a thing right now.
If I were to say a thing.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so.
Do you want anything to hold, like a stand or a book to lean it against or something?
God, I hope these aren't like the ashes of someone or something that I just...
No, it's leftover Halloween candy.
That's perfect. Okay, so something I really liked about this book is that it, instead of, I think a lot of people when they approach magic for the first time, they want recipes, they want how-tos that are very specific, that are very sort of, tell me what to do step by step, exactly what are the sigils, what are the ingredients I need, etc. And this is much more a general kind of direction.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. When I was writing the book, I was thinking back to when I was young and reading books on magic and that kind of stuff, and what I thought I wanted when I was a kid was, or what I did want was, some ancient grimoire, like the Key of Solomon, and like something really like intense, and would give me like the spells and the recipes and the way to summon demons and like all this stuff. And that's fun, but I think what I really was looking for was like a guide or a compass to make sense of all of the stuff that I was reading, right? Because especially when we were younger, it's not so easy to make sense of where all of this is coming from. It's not a unified tradition where it's like, this happened and then this happened and that happened and this is like all a linear, easy to understand thing. Like the nature of magic is such as that it's weird and we don't always know where stuff is coming from and we don't always know the origin of certain things, and the relationship between stuff is not always a clear line, and sometimes there's just outright lies about ancient goddess cults worshiping Diana, and like there's a lot of books with that, and so you don't know at first that that's not true.
Yeah.
There's like so I think what I wanted to do is just be like, okay, if this is people's first book on magic, or if this is one of your first books on magic, I want to give you a way to look at the other books that you're going to be reading going on, and I want to give you, and if this is your first book on activism, like I want to give you the right like language and like deftly and sort of subtly introduce people to like leftist concepts without being like, well, if you really read Marx, you would understand, so I wanted to like, put those in like subtle and fun ways so that people kind of have that downloaded into them while they go out and like learn other stuff. So thank you. Yeah, I put a lot of work into making it sort of like more of a guide than like a bunch of spells and stuff. And like that's something I still might write, like depending on how this book goes and what the reception to it is and what I feel needs to come next. Like I might write a spell book, or I might write something that is more formulaic and like, okay, here's stuff that you can do. But I think it's important to give people the tools to individualize their practice, and give people kind of the broad ideas that they need to sort of begin to make their own craft and their own practice up, you know? And not feel,
So that actually dovetails well with something I wanted to talk to you about in reading this book. And so it's with the sort of rise of a return to mainstream popularity for witchcraft, and especially the sort of commerce that comes with that, you know, people selling crystals that supposedly will change the mood of the room or something like that. There seems to be a move toward the idea of selling you witchcraft as a product. And I feel like this book pushes back against that a little bit.
Yeah, I tried to. And, like, the most, again, like, I didn't want to write a book that was just like, listen up, motherfuckers. Like, here's why you're all doing things wrong. Yeah. I wanted to be, like, fun, and I wanted to meet people where they are, I think. So, but I do feel very strongly about the commodification of witchcraft and the commodification of magic in general right now. You know, I've seen people recently, like, decrying, like, oh, we should just abandon witchcraft, like, it's become too commodified, like, we need a new word for this, like, we need to, like, switch things up and, like, and, you know, stop calling ourselves witches because it's become too commodified. And I think if people want to do that, that's fine, but I think that, you know, witchcraft has survived empires, like, it will survive capitalism, like, you know, I'm not too worried about, like, witchcraft being ruined by what's happening to it right now, but I do think that we have to be really cautious and really critical of witchcraft's success in the mainstream right now, because if you are able to not just survive but thrive under capitalism, either, like, capitalism has determined that you either are not a threat or it has learned to make you a profitable enterprise, right? And it has learned how to exploit you. So I think that the witchcraft that is becoming, you know, popular, and I'm trying to think of a way to say this, right? Because on the one hand, I do think it is, like, a largely positive archetype for, you know, people to be seeing out there in the press. It's certainly, I think, like, a much more positive role model for young people, like young girls, to be, like, seeing in themselves. But I also think, you know, all right, well, how much of a challenge is this really? Like, how radical is this archetype right now really, when, like, apparently it's perfectly fine to put pentagrams on, you know, leggings, and it's perfectly fine to put sigils on jackets and that kind of stuff, right? What are we doing? And, like, what, like, is this, like, I don't know. So I get very frustrated when I look at it, because to me, magic and witchcraft come from, like, the power of that comes from a relationship, and it comes from to me, one of the things that really drove me to magic when I was young, and what has kept me with it for so long, is it really pushes back, I think, against, like, nihilism and alienation, like, because there's this inherent, you know, meaning, and there's this inherent dialogue that you have to engage in the world if you're doing magic, you know. Things don't just happen just because, and oh, lol, that's so stupid. It's like, no, like, you are in conversation with the universe. If that happened, there's a reason, and we have to, like, interrogate that, right? And I think that capitalism, on the other hand, gets all of its power from alienation and from nihilism and from beating you down and making you isolated and alone. And so it depresses me a little bit when I see witchcraft being turned into that, because to me it's like, no, this is the thing that gets you out. Like, this is the thing that fights against that. Don't let them take it.
So when it comes to, like, cultivating the sort of relationships that are at the heart of witchcraft, these are not necessarily just, you know, interpersonal relationships between you and another standard human being kind of thing. What kinds of relationships are we talking about? And, like, how do you do it? How do you make friends with the universe? How do you make friends with the universe?
We'll just start putting googly eyes on everything, and that's
that sounds great, actually.
Right? Like, that's your animism 101, is just start putting googly eyes on everything. Like, hello, desk. Oh, Sarah. How are you doing? doing today, desk? Just turn into Pee-wee's house, Pee-wee Herman's house. No, I think for everyone it's going to be different, right? Like I think with some people it can make the most sense to like start with other people and then work to animals, then work to plants, and then work to objects. Some people it works better like start with objects and then work up to people, like whatever, whatever way you want to go. But I think recognizing that, like, I mean, I consider myself an animist. I consider, us to live in a world imbued with spirits and filled with spirits. And that's really trippy, and it's a big mindfuck, because it's like, okay, well, if consciousness isn't like contained just to humans and the human brain, like, what is it? And like, who else has it? And, we know for a fact that, like, perception changes the nature of a thing, that looking at something changes it, like, on a very, like, nano level. So I don't know. It's a whole head trip to really go down, but I think we should sort of embrace it more in magic, because I think, let me back up. The question is how to start doing that. And I think, like with a lot of magic, if you're getting into it or just starting to get into it, like, find a thing that you find interesting and stick with that at first. Like, find a thing you want to have a relationship with and start there. You're like, you're not going to be...
Deep, not wide.
Deep, not wide, yeah. Especially in the beginning. Like, okay, you have a plant, you have a house plant in your house, and you want to have a relationship with it. Like, talk to it. Meditate with it. See what it likes. Like, that tree outside your apartment or that tree outside your house. Like, sit and have your coffee with it and talk to it about your day. Start cultivating, like, see how it changes depending on the weather and the, time of year and that kind of stuff, and start to really form, the pen that you write with every day. Start to form a really close relationship with stuff and watch and learn from it as if it was another person and not just a thing, right?
How do we learn to listen to something like a tree? Like, what is the, because you talk about it in the book, so this isn't just me saying this out of nowhere, but like
how do we talk to trees,
right yeah, how do we learn to listen to the tree that is the self, that is also the universe, that is also the tree? But actually, though, how do you listen to a tree? What's it like
listening to trees? I think it's going to depend, again, on the person and the tree and the environment that you're in. Because I grew up in the woods, so it was very easy for me to find trees to hang out with and talk to and be around, because I was always with them, right?
Yeah.
And
you can't get away from them.
And that's...
New England, my God.
Yeah. But that alone, like, right there, like, there were trees growing up that were I got this immediate energy from, like, okay, this is a very friendly tree. This is a nice tree. Then there are trees that, like, just like you say, like, you can't get away from them. They're everywhere. And there's this creepy feeling. And I think that sounds like such a subtle thing, but I think a lot of us have these kind of intuitive feelings when we are presented with objects or rooms or trees or people, and we're kind of used to listening to our intuition when it comes to people. Like, oh, I get a bad vibe from this person, I'm gonna, like, sit on the other end of the subway, right? Or I'm gonna keep this conversation short. But for some reason, we don't think of objects or plants or animals in the same way necessarily. Like, oh, I get a weird vibe from this tree, or I get a really happy vibe from this bush. Like, I think listening first to that inner voice, like, oh, whenever I walk past this tree, I feel the color red. I get this immediate impulse, and following that and going down the rabbit hole of that feeling. Like, okay, I always think of this song when I walk past this tree. What if I listened to that song next time I walk past it? What if I listened to that song and then meditated with that tree? And then what would the tree tell me? And then, oh, is it happy because, long ago these two people proposed to each other under this tree? Long ago somebody planted this tree because they were in love? Like, what's the story, right? And I think that's the, that is like a way to kind of build it and to follow that thread. Is just maybe I think this way because I think kind of cinematically, and I think kind of like like a movie sometimes, so I get very strong impressions from things and very strong like feelings from things. But I think a lot of people get those feelings, and I think it's important just to like honor that and follow that.
Yeah. You talk about the idea of doing ancestor work in your book, and I think there's a reluctance among a lot of particularly sort of like left-leaning white people to do ancestor work, because there's this understanding that, you know, if you are, say, a white American, then that means probably your ancestors, if not, you know, holding the kinds of negative views that you know, might have been like a product of their time, however much that, you know, absolves them of anything. But like actively we're probably participating in maybe some of the most terrible things of American or world history, you know, the genocides, the slave trade, the whole gambit of diabolical unacceptability. So what would you say to someone who has these reluctances, the noun form of reluctance, who's nervous about that sort of thing, or says, ancestor work, not for me, not going to do it, my ancestors are probably all garbage all the way down?
Well, I think it's a very valid feeling. Like, I want to, if people have, you know, garbage families or don't know their families or are pretty sure that their ancestors did some bad things. Like, I know my family tree a little bit, and like, I know I've got some shit ancestors, or I've got ancestors that were perhaps well-intentioned, but actually harmed a lot of people, right? And that, like, that kind of stuff, right? So I think, and I've got ancestors that, you know, maybe were separated by generations, but if they knew each other, would not get along, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's I want to validate that feeling that people have, because, you know, it's real. A lot of us right now, especially I think in our generation, are struggling under the weight of past generations and kind of don't want anything to do with it. But I think that struggle and that weight is actually exactly why, especially in a political context, why we have to begin to strengthen our relationship with our ancestors and begin a dialogue with our ancestors. Because let's say your ancestors were complicit in really awful stuff that happened. Like, let's say they did participate in like the slave trade, or they were just basically racist, or they were super sexist or something like that. Like, those ghosts are still hanging around. Like, we still are living with the legacy of colonialism and the slave trade and genocide and like all these awful things, and those ghosts haven't gone away. And yeah. I think that part of ancestor work can be just the work to, you know, talk to your ancestors and say, look, you need to go. Like, thank you for trying as best you did, thank you, but you need to like move on from here right now. Or bringing in the positive ancestors who maybe didn't get their shot, to bring in like that healing energy, right? Like, I think that a lot of white people have a resistance to doing ancestor work for very valid reasons, but I think actually it's really important for white people to talk to our ancestors and be like, Grandpa, what the fuck? you know, I think that's important. I also think, you know, on a positive way, like not just talking about the bad ancestors, but talking about like the good ancestors, like, you know, you can always skip a couple generations if you want to go back to like farther down the line. If you don't want to talk to the ones that you know weren't great, you can always go back and like, I guarantee you have some cool great grandma who was actually a witch and you didn't know it, right? Like, I guarantee you have a cool ancestor in your line. And they want you to succeed, like, as spiritual beings and as, you know, people engaged in magic. Like, there's a lot of spirits, and they range from indifferent to positive to spirits that really want to fuck you up. Your ancestors really want to help you because they fought and died so that you could be here right now. So they want to see you succeed, and that's like just an awesome ally to have on your side. It's just spirits that want you to be happy, right? Like, that's great. And we should be utilizing and like working with them.
An army of cool ghosts. And actually, you make the point in the book that like, when we talk about ancestors and the ancestors we would work with, these aren't necessarily your blood relatives, right?
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that like ancestry is not just about blood. The same way that like we recognize that like family can be not just about blood, like family can be a found thing, family can be adopted. There's ancestry by the same token extends beyond blood. I think I use the example of like, you know, if you're really into music, like using like an artist that inspired you, who maybe has passed on, is like a really, that there is an ancestor of spirit. I think if you're an American, like, guess what? The founding fathers are kind of our collective ancestors. Like, that's like America's ancestral spirits. They're not great, but that's kind of exactly what I mean. Like, we have to kind of work with them and either be like, hey guys, like your time is over, or like, you know, we have to acknowledge it at the very least, right? Yeah, and that can be a way to begin ancestor work if you either don't want to work with your family or don't really know your family too well, your family history. Think about where you are in life right now and think about the people who have passed on, who inspired you to live the life that you're living, or the people who maybe were in your profession before you were. If you're like a writer, like think about writers of the past that inspire you. If you're an actor, think about maybe actors of the past that inspire you, that like push you every single day. Like, that is an ancestor of yours, and you can work with them and you can talk to them.
I want to talk about initiations, because I think initiations are a huge part of this book, and they're really important. And you mentioned that the election of 2016 was probably a big initiation for a lot of people. But how do you conceive of initiation in like a political sense and in a witchcrafty type sense?
Cool. Yeah. So I think initiation to me is a profound shift in consciousness. And yeah, I think that that's a good, concise way. Like, a profound shift in consciousness, often like a consciously made shift in consciousness, like, and a lasting one. Because you can shift consciousness by just getting like a little drunk, right? But like you can shift consciousness in a lot of different ways. But I think initiation is kind of, you are a different person the day after you are initiated. Yeah. You know, there's a fundamental change in you that has taken place, and that can be the result of something that happens to you, like, you know, a near-death experience or an alien abduction or something like that. Or it could be a consciously made choice to initiate into a tradition, or I think I bring up stuff like, you know, confirmations and bar mitzvahs and things like that are initiation ceremonies, right? And they're not always perhaps treated that way. Like, I think in our society, we're not always taught to look for initiations, and we're not always taught to like that's something that we need. But I think it's like something that we profoundly need. Like, we need something. We need, whether by accident or by ritual, ways to enter us into the world and like formalize. Like, okay, I'm here. Like, I am a conscious actor in my life, right?
Right.
I think I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but and maybe this is something I actually want to ask you too, but I noticed a profound shift in how easy it was to talk about magic post 2016.
Yeah.
Like, did you experience this? Because I feel like everyone I ask has had a similar story.
I mean, it's funny. I feel like with 2016 and all that business, there was this moment where you really saw a profound break in society between essentially people who looked at the various happenings of that time and said, oh, you know, all the old institutions, they're completely meaningless, there's nothing there. Like, honestly, like, what's weird is, like, I was fine with talking about magic before then, but the thing that I have more ease talking about now is Lenin, honestly. And just, like, the idea of, like, Lenin, like, when Lenin's like, you know, an election in a bourgeois democracy, this is my Lenin voice apparently, in a bourgeois democracy is basically just, you know, it's a choice between members of the ruling class and which one will be able to rule everyone else. You know, it's democracy for a small sliver. And being like, yeah, you know what, yeah, okay. But
I had no idea that Lenin was from Nebraska. That's fascinating.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's Lincoln, Nebraska is actually like a derivation of just Lenin, Nebraska, but
it's a protectorate under the Soviet Union.
Oh my god, only. Well, I mean, Alabama almost was for a second there, when that whole, like, when Stalin offered to send the Red Army to back up, like, protesting sharecroppers. But
oh my god,
that's another story. But yeah, 2016, it seemed like a lot of people were like, either you say that the fundamental institutions that govern America are only as valuable as everyone agreeing that they all work. And the second someone says, I'm just going to not pay attention to that, like, suddenly they just disappear. Which seems to be the sort of, like, Trump thing of, like, you can just you can just pick, I'm not gonna do that, and then suddenly there's nothing anyone can really do about it. Like the idea that like the Democrats for a while were like, if we try to do an impeachment and the Senate doesn't impeach him because they're all Republicans and they're going to reject it out of hand, then we lose the threat of impeachment, even though that we are acknowledging and saying that the threat is an empty threat. So there are people who sort of like said like all of this is gone, and then there are the people who clung to it as hard as humanly possible and started making votive candles of Robert Mueller and saying,
I'm still with her.
Exactly, that sort of thing. It's like it was very much a kind of, I forget what the book is called now, but there was a sociological study of a cult that was an apocalyptic cult, and when the apocalypse didn't happen.
Oh, the Millerites. Is it?
I mean, that's one of them.
Oh.
That's a great one. But this one was like, I think like this book maybe came out in the 70s or the 80s, and it was with a contemporary cult of that time, like sitting with them and being like, so what do you do now? And apparently the sort of takeaway point was like, when the prophecy fails, you just cling to the prophecy even harder. But I don't know. I mean, do you find that people have an easier time talking about magic post the disaster of 2016?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with like everything you just said. I think that like it was. I think that so 2 points. So yes, I noticed pre-2016, if I ever I was very reluctant to talk to people about magic and witchcraft and that kind of part of my life. Like it was something I kind of kept hidden from a lot of people. And if I told people about it, I always felt like I had to couch it in like a history lesson, basically. Like, in the olden times. And like I always felt like I had to justify it by making it like smart, right?
Yeah.
And intelligent, like a proper thing to do, right? And I think that was because, you talk, for me at least, talking to people before 2016, if you told someone that you believed in magic or that you practiced magic, they were like, what? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I think after 2016, it got a lot easier to just be like, I practice magic. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that reality is a malleable thing and is basically made up of a function of belief. And people are like, oh, okay, I get that now. Yeah. Because we saw it happen. Like, we saw that in action.
Because like before 2016, I feel like every time I talked about it with anybody, I had to couch it in terms of quantum mechanics to make it seem like even palatable at all. Like, oh, no, it's just, like every electron's in a superposition until it's observed, and so if you just extend that to the O.J. Simpson trial made random number generators break for a while. It's really weird. I don't know.
Yeah. Wait, is that true?
I remember hearing that a while back, that like during the O.J. Simpson trial, when everyone in the country was essentially focused in a very emotional way on one thing for an extended period of time, like random number generators, like if you had like a binary random number generator, instead of like sort of evening out at 0 and 1, it would suddenly just do like all ones for like a day or something like that.
Wow, that's cool. But yeah, so I thought that like it was, watching 2016, it was an initiation because a lot of people just had a real breaking moment where like everything that they thought about America was suddenly different because nobody thought that Trump was going to get elected, right? I remember the evening of the election, and I remember the day after so very vividly. And I remember riding the subway the next day, and it was just silent. Like I remember the entire walk to work was like almost dead silent. And this is like the middle of New York City, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody on the subway was talking, nobody on the street was talking. Like all you would hear was like the sound of cars going by. It was the eeriest day, right? The next day. And so, okay, when you're initiated, it's an embodied and a lived experience that shows you that reality is different than how you thought it was. And now you can't go back from that. Like, I remember the first time I saw a ghost, right? And it was like, I believed in ghosts before that, but it was such a chilling experience that ever since then, I'm like, no, like, reality is just different than how we think it is, right?
Right.
Like, there's just shit going on that we have no fucking clue about.
There's like no going back once you...
Yeah, and I think that was people watching Trump get elected was just like, okay, if this is happening right now, like, everything that I thought is different. Like, that reality was there beforehand, but now people are into that reality. And I think that the problem comes when you resist that you are actually in that reality. When you try to go back to how you were before the initiation. And it's like trying to go back and wear the clothes that you were wearing when you were a child, right? Like, it's not going to help you. Yeah. And you can still look back fondly on those memories of, pre 2016, but like that's not where we are, and that wasn't the reality then either. And you have to be able to lean into that initiation and lean into that new reality, or else you're just gonna end up fucking everything up even more for yourself and keep yourself stuck in a place that is not good and that you need to move past.
Yeah. And, well, okay, so you posit 2016 as being sort of the big initiation for a lot of people, maybe for, like, the country as a being, if you want to do, like, a big, wide-scale animism there. But your initiation, at least in the book that you talk about, or one of your really big ones, was when you went to Standing Rock. Can you talk about that experience a little bit?
Yeah, so I want to say before I dive in, like, I want to be very conscious about talking about Standing Rock, like, us as a white person. Like, I don't want to just be like, wow, it was this great experience, and it was, like, basically Coachella, but it was, like, a little more serious, Like, it was, like, real. I don't want to talk about it like someone who was a tourist there. I think that I was there for only a very short amount of time, just a couple days, and I was able to leave and like return to safety here in the big city. And I think that my job as somebody who went and came back and is able to like continue to live life in like a pretty stable way is to be a witness to it. So that's what I want to, that's the intention I bring when I talk about Standing Rock, is like being a witness to what I saw there and keeping that spirit sort of alive in people's consciousness. So basically so the 2016 election happens, and like 2 weeks later I get fired. So it was great. And I was just like, cool, like Trump is president and I don't have a job. This is cool. And I remember like an hour after I got fired, I was hanging out with my friend who was also fired the same day. Long story, great job, great boss, love it. But we were hanging out, and I got a call from a friend who's like, hey, a friend of mine, this like indigenous activist, is heading out to Standing Rock. Do you want to go? And I was like, you know what? Fuck it, yes, like let me go. Because I had been as involved as I could be here in New York. Like I had done like a fundraiser and that kind of stuff, and I was following it all very closely. But I had never thought that I was actually gonna, go there and help out there. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, like my life just fell apart. Like, let's do it. So the next day I got in a van and drove to North Dakota. Yeah, it was pretty fucking wild. So we were there bringing supplies and like food and blankets and stuff like that. And it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life because, one, it was probably the closest I've ever come to actually getting to witness what an anti-capitalist or non-capitalistic society looks like. Like nobody's paying for anything. Everything is done in like a collective way. Like people are there to help each other, and everything is a function of like the people who can help the people who cannot be helped, or who cannot help themselves, or are helping people in another way. And it's all like this mutual, it was a very mutual society, a society based on like justice and spirituality. Like there's signs all around the camp that were like, this is an act of prayer. Like by being here, by putting your body on the line for a sacred site, that is an act of prayer. Like that is an embodied prayer, which I thought was really amazing. But on the other hand, like you're walking around this camp and everyone's happy and helping each other, and like there's just so much love. And then you look to the horizon and there's like snipers in the hills, and there's drones, and there's tanks, and there's armored vehicles, and you kind of realize that the normalcy and the peace and like what I consider normal in my day-to-day life is a product of violence, and it is kept alive by violence. Like right here sitting in this room, like the reason we are able to do this is because of immense violence and like evil has happened and is happening right now. Yeah, you see the things holding up the world. You see the spokes and the pillars holding up the world that we're in. All of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, like the reason that we are here right now, like the reason America exists is because of these guys on the hill. It's because of these snipers and these cops and these mercenaries and that kind of stuff. And like the West was never won. We're still committing a genocide. Like it was just like, wow, like this is still happening. This didn't end. This is an ongoing campaign and an ongoing venture. And I think that witnessing those two things, like that dichotomy, really shifted my consciousness in a profound way. And I look at that as an initiation for myself.
Let's say someone feels, even now, uninitiated, but they know that like there's a veil here and there's an awareness that they want. Do you have any like recommendations or suggestions for someone who's like, I still need to like really see the world I'm in?
I mean, I give a little initiation ritual in the book, so there is one. There is one there. But if you want a more intense one, I think it depends on what you want to shift about your consciousness, because I think also initiation is not a one-time thing. Initiation like keeps happening. Like I felt again like I had a similar moment to Standing Rock about a year ago when I was protesting outside like an ICE detention center, and I saw people being loaded into vans to get deported, and that was like, wow, like we live in a profoundly evil society, you know. Like there's like fascism is alive and well, like, so there's, you know, it depends on what you want to do. If you're trying to initiate yourself politically, I would say think about what it is about your consciousness that you're trying to shift. Like, what is it that you still are having trouble grasping? And really try to put yourself into a position where that can be grappled with in a lived way. Like, if you are still grappling with the idea of, you know, capitalism and being like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but like, I just can't imagine a world without that. Like, try to put yourself into a position where you will see perhaps what a world without it would look like, or see the absolute evil of it apparent to you. Like, it's hard to come up with an example, but I think consciously deciding to stand up in this way, like, I mean, get arrested. Like, I don't know, like, literally, like, get arrested. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, I mean, maybe don't, like, this is obviously dependent on, like, you know, if you're able-bodied, if you're not, you know, your immigration status, all of that kind of stuff. But if you were able to, and you think that it's gonna, like, not have a profoundly negative impact on your life, like, I think getting arrested is actually a really fucking, like, as part of like a mass action or something like that, really is a way to kind of get inside the guts of the world and really see like how all of this functions. I was arrested last year and it had a really profound effect on me. It like really fucked me up because it was crazy. I
remember when you got like, you went to a birthday party right after you got out of jail. Oh,
that's right. Yeah, like the next day, right? Yeah, that was fucked up. Yeah, because I was, this is kind of a tangent, but I was arrested on the Manhattan Bridge with a couple other people for trying to do a banner drop. And if you're arrested on a critical structure in the city of New York, because of events in this city's history, you have to be considered as a potential terrorism suspect. So I was held for over 6 hours and questioned by the NYPD counterterrorism unit and the FBI. It was very scary, but I'm fine. But it was a real, like, oh man, like, this is how fucked up the justice system is. Like, this is the gears turning, you know, and this is how this all works. So, okay, that's one way to do it, getting arrested. But I think magically, kind of a similar way. Like, what is it, like, if you still can't quite believe, like, if you still can't quite believe in magic, if you still can't quite believe in spirits or spells or what have you, I think really trying to put yourself in, like really go for the big magic, like really, like, start, like, I think honestly, like, seeing magic work in your life is a great way to kind of initiate yourself in a subtle way, because it's like, damn, this shit is real. But yeah, I think that finding ways to embody and live through these experiences is probably like my best advice.
Okay. And I think it's very easy for someone who like sees the deep and entrenched evil at the heart of American capitalism, American power, and things like that, and to sort of, you know, it's that Lovecraftian thing. You look at it and your mind just kind of balks and you despair.
Yeah.
So what is a good antidote to that kind of despair? Or like, what would you? Because it's one thing to be like let this radicalize you rather than lead you to despair, which I think is the old, you know, needle point that circulates around the internet.
Yeah.
But like, what would one do? What do you do as a person in this world who has been through the intestines of the legal system?
You know, it's it's so interesting because like I'm actually kind of going through this right now where like I thought I had a pretty good handle on how affected I was by all of this, and I thought that I was like, you know, like I've come to a good like self-care routine where like I can like, you know, look at this stuff and not despair, and like I can not freeze up or something like that. But then I've been like doing a lot of interrogating of my life recently, and it's like, damn, like capitalism has really fucked me up. Like just knowing how I think for the last couple years, like just knowing how evil kind of everything sort of subtly is okay. So let me back up. I think that capitalism is evil, and like I'm not just saying that as like a flippant thing, like or like a shorthand or something like that. Like I'm not a moral relativist. I really very strongly believe that there is such a thing called evil, and like we need to be able to say that evil is a thing that exists in the world. And like I think we need to be able to call. Like, I think we need to be able to call Hitler evil. I think we need to be able to call rape evil. Like, I think we need to be able to call concentration camps evil. Like, there's just certain things that I think that, like, we need that kind of moral clarity. But the thing is that capitalism is fucking evil. And because it pervades everything that we do, the real evil of it is that it makes all of us have to participate in evil. And it makes all of us have to engage with a certain level of evil every single day. Like right now we are wearing clothes that were made by slaves. Like right now we are living on land that was created by genocide. Like we like every single thing that we touch has a tinge of that. And I think for the last couple of years that's paralyzed me sometimes, like from making choices or trying to have as little impact on the world as possible, because I'm just like, okay, well, if everything is evil, I'm going to try to like back up and not try to engage with this as much as I can. But I think that recognizing how all-encompassing it is and really sitting with that is actually very freeing in a way, because it's like, okay, everything is fucked, everything is evil. I have literally no choice but to rebel against all of this and like just actually dive thoroughly into the world and fuck shit up, because like everything has to change, and like in whatever way you can in your life, just being like, no, I'm not going to engage with that. I'm going to change that. I'm going to try to make it so that I am not complicit in this fucked up evil system that we live under. And that's going to depend on, you know, person to person what that looks like. But I think that the despair, actually, I think you have to kind of go through a little bit of the despair, and then at the end hopefully get to the point where you're like, no, you know what, like there is a way forward, and I can do that by, you know, drinking that poison and then coming out the other end stronger, I guess. So like, don't stay in the despair, but go through it.
It's a part of the process, but one of many parts.
Yes, I think it's important to go through it, and so that on the other end you come to the way that you can have the biggest impact that you can, and like in your own liberation and the liberation of others. And I think also just like not feeling bad about taking breaks and having fun sometimes, which I think a lot of activists are, myself included, very bad at doing. But like it is imperative that you take care of yourself.
I mean, Adorno would say that all fun is the road to fascism, so I don't know.
Oh no. Well then, oh no.
Let's all reject Adorno together.
Yes.
So actually, speaking of doing things and getting stuff done, we're in the midst of a primary, which is leading to an even bigger election later.
Wait, I didn't know that.
You know, what's great about America is that the elections, they never stop.
They never stop. Never stop stopping.
They're just on top of each other all the time. It's like being buried under like 1,000 pounds of elections.
We love our sequels.
Oh God, don't we? But elections, a lot of people will say, like, you know, you're despairing about politics right now. Either you don't have a right to despair unless you voted in the last election or something like that, which is always very helpful. I love being shamed. Or if you want to do something, get involved in the election and only the election. What role do elections actually have in changing the world for the better? Some? None? A bunch?
Ooh, let's see. I think it really depends on the election, and I think it depends on the candidate, because voting is a tactic. It is not a strategy. Like, it is a tactic to creating change. It is not a strategy for creating change. And I make that very clear in the book, because I'm like, there's a tactic, like a strategy is an overall game plan that you have for changing something, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, we want to end capitalism, and we're going to do that by getting Medicare for all, and we're going to do that by decommodifying parts of society, right? But within that, you have certain tactics about how you're going to get that done. You can protest, you can letter write, you can do direct action, you can do mutual aid, you can vote. These are all tactics that we have, and I think it's very important to remember that all you are doing when you are voting for someone, you are helping to decide the conditions under which we are fighting. Like, that's what voting is. So I think that I don't have any illusions that, like, anyone, I mean, I have personal favorites, but, like, I don't want to necessarily, like, endorse on the podcast, I guess, but maybe I should. I don't know.
Maybe a fun exclusive, unless you just did it a bunch, and then it'd be like just the first. The
I think
first
if
time's
you
exclusive, right?
Yeah, I think if you follow my Instagram stories, you know who I'm voting for. But I'm a member of DSA. Like, go figure. But yeah, so guess who? I don't have any illusions that, like, we're gonna elect any one of these people and things are magically going to get better, or like things are magically gonna, like, the problems are gonna go away, because there's always gonna be a fight, whether, like, with people in, like, already in power, or with, you know, with us, right? Like, there's always gonna be a fight that's gonna happen. And I think that if you plan on voting in 2020, really stop and think, like, what overall strategy, what is your overall strategy for changing things, and how does the person that you vote for fit into that strategy?
Yeah.
And what is your strategy going to be, and, like, what are your next tactics going to be after you vote, like the day after the election? Like, what is the next step, even if your person does get in? Because you need to continue to push electeds even when they're in there, and hopefully what you're doing is you put someone in there that you like, so that you can push them in the direction that you want to push them in.
Yeah.
Like, and you keep pushing. But there's a lot of elections where things don't seem to really change, because the people who are on the ballot or on the ticket are kind of like what you were saying earlier, like, just different little rulers that we get to pick, and, like, and that kind of stuff. You know, like, this is where, I mean, I personally vote. I think that it is important for people to vote, but I also think that it's very valid to not vote because of all the ills that are happening. I think that if you don't vote, hopefully there's other organizing that, like, you're doing, or ways that you're trying to change stuff, because, like, being checked out completely is, like, not a great thing. Like, when I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but
do it.
The coffee is really hitting my brain, like, right in the center.
It got me about 10 minutes ago, which I feel like is going to be very clear when we listen to this recording again.
Yeah, I'm like, I can see through time. There's that old Emma Goldman line, right? Like, if voting was illegal, if voting changed anything, they would make it illegal.
Right.
And I do think there's a lot of truth to that, but they often do try to make it illegal. Like, if you look at if you look at some place like Georgia, like, they just are throwing away black people's vote. Like, they just, like, there's a reason that they, you know, that we tried for so long to, like, keep, like, black people and indigenous people and women from voting, because that actually would maybe change stuff if everyone actually had the right to vote and everyone actually voted. Like, that actually maybe would, like, that would change stuff. And, like, our system has never been set up for that to be a reality. Like, you know,
I think, what is it, 40% of eligible voters voted in the last election or something like that, and, like, Donald Trump got fewer votes than Mitt Romney did, because nobody went.
And, like, and I mean, we don't live in a democracy, so, like, if we can stop pretending that we do, that would really make me very happy. Like, we just don't, you know, like, the Electoral College is literally a way for, like, you want to talk about not just, like, subtext, but just text, like, that is actually just a way for the ruling class to, like, perpetuate itself.
Yeah.
Like, that's literally what it is. So if we could just stop pretending that we have a functioning democracy, that would really be great. Then maybe we would get some stuff done.
Which, you know, I think that's an initiation that a lot of people need to go through. Though people are also, I mean, what is it, like, there are now 5, 6, 7 states that have voted to give their electoral college votes to whoever wins the popular vote.
Yeah.
Now. Of course, they're all states that tend to go blue anyway, so I don't know how much that's going to change. But, you know, love the spirit of it.
Yeah.
So you're part of the Eco-Socialist Working Group in the Democratic Socialists of America NYC chapter.
Yes. It's the longest name in history.
And congratulations on that.
Thank you.
How important and how useful do you think actually, let's put it in a broader sense. I think a lot of people, when they approach witchcraft, they do it in this very self-directed and individual way. Like, a lot of the witches I meet are anarchists. How vital do you think it is to do things not just as part of some larger movement, but actually in the sense of like an organized, mutual assisted sort of way? I'm being unclear, but like the sense
No,
that,
I feel you, yeah.
Like, how important is it as a witch or as a witch identifying person to do either politics or witchcraft with other people?
Sure. I mean, I think if you can do activism with a group or witchcraft, witchcraft I think is a little different because I tend to do my magic solitary. Like, I have sometimes groups that I practice with, but for the most part, I do kind of keep my spirituality to myself and like kind of do it on my own. So, a spiritual practice, that is going to, I think your mileage is going to vary depending on what kind of person you are or like what kind of stuff you're trying to do. I mean, different workings might require big groups to do or things like that, but I think it's perfectly fine to have like an individualized like private practice that you keep to. But I think if you're doing activism, like if you can find a group to work with, I think it's almost like crucial that you do work within a group, because it's unfair to yourself to make you do all of the work all the time. Like, ideally we're trying to build a movement, and ideally we're trying to make really huge shifts and changes, and there really is only so much that an individual can do.
Yeah.
So if you are able to work with a group, I think it's like indispensable, because you have comrades and allies to like lean on when you just can't get the work done that day, and they can lean on you when they can't. And there's there's more work being done, there's more emails being sent, there's more rallies being held, there's more stuff happening, and that happens through group work and group action. And also ideally, like I think that this is something, maybe this is a bit of a tangent or a bit to the side, but I think that we have to become really used to the idea that like if we're trying to like change everything, and if we're trying to have a mass movement, like we're going to be organizing and we're going to be talking to people that we don't necessarily like we don't like all the same TV shows, and we don't listen to the same music, and they're not cool, and we don't think that they're doing it quote unquote right. But like if they're comrades in the struggle, and if we're all like on the same page like about what kind of world we're trying to build, like that's the thing that matters. And like getting along with people is something we have to get better at doing, I think, just in politics in general. Like people who are, of course, are on our side, right? Like I'm not saying like let's shake hands with fascists. I'm saying like people who like you're trying to organize and trying to get on your side, like it's not always going to be people that you necessarily like want to hang out with, but it's like you know.
I think the phrase you use in the book is people who are dreaming the same dream.
Yeah. That's
cool.
Thanks, past Sarah. You said it better than I did.
Oh gosh, I always love the past self as the ancestor that you would work with the least, for me anyway, because it's that whole thing of like whoever I was 2 days ago is a clown and a coward. I think this is basically, I think we've covered a lot of the things that I've written down in my notes, and I might have held you for like quite a long time.
No, this has
so
been
thank you for your
awesome.
patience and for being so wonderful and giving these thoughtful answers to these questions. You have a book launch coming up, and if everything goes right technologically, this episode will go out before that book launch on Wednesday the 13th.
The 13th at Powerhouse Books in Brooklyn from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m.
And I am led to understand that there is going to be a ritual at that event. Can you talk about that at all, or does it have to be a big old surprise?
I kind of want to keep some of it a surprise, but I will talk around it as much as I can.
Fun.
Okay. So, I think there's been a lot of talk in like the press and the community and all that kind of stuff about public hexing and like hexing Trump and hexing Kavanaugh and like binding Trump and that kind of stuff.
How do you actually? Can we? Sorry, I don't want to derail it, because I wanted to ask you about this, and I feel like we covered it a little bit when we talked about the idea of like protest as a kind of public ritual. Though who knows if that actually got captured because of the technical problems we had with the recording. Thanks, Mercury retrograde. But like, how do you feel about like just like, first of all, big public hexing, but also just like the idea of like is it acceptable political activity to curse your political enemies? Is that okay? Is it useful?
I think it is okay. I think I have kind of a complicated, I guess I have a complicated set of feelings about doing like public hexing rituals, because I think on the one hand it's like, I guess like the simple answer is like, I think it's fine. Like, I think if you want to do
morally it's okay.
I think it's morally fine, and I think
it's kind of like punching a Nazi with a ghost fist.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Like, I think if you want to get together with your friends and do a big hex on Trump or a big hex on Kavanaugh or like whoever you want to do, like, I think that's fine. Like, do it, have fun, go for it. I think there's something to be said for like, it's very difficult to curse or hex or do ill magic, even binding people like who are very big, prominent public figures, because so much power and so much magic is kind of around them that it's going to be a lot harder for you to actually work on them than it would be like somebody in your immediate circle, right? Also, just like functionally, like I find that if I'm doing magic for a person or on a person, like if I have an object of theirs, that's going to make it work a lot better.
Yeah.
If I don't have an object that once belonged to Donald Trump, so like I don't have that magical connection the same way that I would have with like a person that's that I actually know or have met, right?
Yeah.
So there's also just like functionally, like that's difficult to do. So there's a bit of like it's on the one hand, I think it does make us look a tiny bit weird when like we do a big public hex and then obviously it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Or in people's minds it doesn't really work, right? Kavanaugh still gets on the Supreme Court, Trump is still president. It doesn't necessarily make that look great. But
yeah.
I think that again, like something I'm trying to do with the book, and like something I'm trying to like enter into the conversation when we talk about like politics and witchcraft and magic, is like political magic doesn't just have to be like an actual literal spell that you do with your friends. It doesn't have to be like a group ritual that you all engage in. Like it can be anything, and as long as it is done with like the intent and with the with the knowledge of like the mechanics of how magic works, like
yeah.
I think that anything can be an act of political magic. But yeah, so I didn't want to talk about hexing or binding in the book of public figures, because I was just like, this is being talked about a lot. This is getting a lot of play, and that's like a big discussion that like it's a thorny one that I didn't really want to get into the book, because I was just like, I want to concentrate on like expanding our definition of what all of this is. Yeah. But yeah, I think like if you want to do it, like it can't hurt. Like it can't hurt if you want to like juice your activism with a bit of witchcraft, right? With a bit of hexing or a bit of binding, of people that you're targeting.
Yeah, but it wouldn't, like, once again, a tactic, not a strategy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so back to where we were just a moment ago. Mm-hmm. You've got this book launch coming up on the 13th, 7 to 9 at
Powerhouse.
Goddamn.
No, it's okay. And Powell's City of Books. No, Powerhouse.
Oh yeah, that's not in this city.
No, different city.
Oh yeah,
I'm flying all the way to Portland.
We're in New York City, by the way. I feel like I should have established that before we did any of this.
Cue like the track of like a honking horn, like siren.
I'm walking here. So this ritual, though, you don't want to talk about it explicitly, but you will talk around it. You said you promised.
Yes. Okay. So. Yeah, like I said, a lot of play and talk about binding and hexing public figures, and I think that, that's all good. I think that that's fine. Like I said, do it if you want. Yeah. But I think almost more than like hexing or binding figures that are around right now and in the public eye, I think something actually maybe more needed right now is an exorcism, and like exorcising the demons of the past.
Hell yes.
So I think that like what we really need right now is to like clear out all this bullshit that is like still hanging around, and the ghosts that are still plaguing our politics and our minds and our imaginations, right? So the ritual itself is going to be 2 parts. It's going to be an exorcism of the past and an exorcism of the demonic forces in our politics that are still hanging over us to this day. And it is going to be a blessing and an entry into the new world that we will hopefully all be building together. So with my book as like a symbol of a part of what that new world will look like. So yeah, and I'm really excited, and I'm really nervous because I've never done a big ritual like this in front of people before, but I think it's going to be a great show, and I think it's going to be, I hope to, again, like I think exorcism is something we really need to be doing more of. So hopefully maybe this will be the next memeable ritual that people can do.
I love it. Well, okay, so that's very exciting. Congratulations so much on this book. It's
Thank
amazing.
you.
People should buy it. Everyone should buy it. Thank you so much for talking to me about all this. And hooray.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a great interview. I really enjoyed talking with you. This was like one of my favorite interviews I've done on this book, so thank you.
Hell yeah. Okay, cool.
This is awesome. Thank you.
I guess.
Oh, should I plug? Can I just say?
Plug everything you want.
Plugs. Here we are. My Instagram handle is @CityMystic. That's the only social media that I do, so follow me there. I also have a website, sarahlyons.org, because .com was taken. So there already is one. Well, I don't know if it's related to this, but whenever I Google my name, there's a Fallout character named Sarah Lyons.
I've seen this.
And we don't look anything alike, but I'm like, I never played Fallout, so I need someone to like explain to me exactly who she is. I know she's like part of the Brotherhood of Steel, and I think Liam Neeson plays her dad in the video games, so that's cool. But like,
oh my god, it's like you're from Taken or something.
Yeah. Well, I think she does. I don't know if this is even a spoiler. I think she dies at one point, but now she's back. I don't know, because I've just, whenever I Google my name now, I'm like brought updates about this video game character. But anyways, so sarahlyons.com was taken. sarahlyons.org. That is my website.
Thank you.
And that has links to articles and things that I've done, so you can check that all out there. And buy the book.
Buy the book, join the DSA, probably.
Yeah, come by the Eco-Socialist Working Group sometime. Join the fight.
Hell yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Huge thanks to Sarah Lyons for taking the time to talk to me about her great book. Be sure to check out Revolutionary Witchcraft, which is available now in stores, and to check out more about Sarah Lyons at sarahlyons.org and at CityMystic on Instagram. Well, this has been the first episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Listen next week, and we'll be looking into a listener question about inspiriting statues and other inanimate objects. If you have a question for our research department, you can submit that at cooperwilhelm.com/witchhassle or on our Twitter and Instagram, which are both @witchhassle. And if you're interested in supporting the show, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/witchhassle, which will enable you to listen to ad-free full episodes and give you access to all sorts of other goodies. Our theme music was performed by Sebastian Baverstam and recorded by Edward Lee. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll catch you next time.